Some messages change your life forever. Some bring joy. Some bring sorrow. And then there are the ones that don't just break your heart, they ignite something inside you. The text arrived in the middle of a high-profile client meeting, my phone buzzing discreetly on the polished glass table of the conference room. I was walking my client, a wealthy real estate developer, through the final mood board for his Manhattan penthouse. Every detail custom marble countertops, hand-woven Italian rugs, sleek modern lighting had been meticulously curated by me and my team. A multi-million-dollar deal was hanging in the balance. I glanced down at my phone, expecting a routine update from my assistant. Instead, I saw his name, Daniel. It had been weeks since he'd last bothered to text me. A heavy, sinking feeling settled in my stomach before I even unlocked my screen, and then I read the message. I'm leaving. Chloe and I are moving to LA. I've already emptied our accounts. Have fun with your little design firm. Haha. The words were casual, flippant, almost cheerful. I felt my pulse slow, not race, but slow. A strange, focused clarity settled over me. Across the table, my client was still talking, his hands gesturing toward the renderings of his new living space. I smiled, nodding as if nothing had happened, as if my husband of 13 years hadn't just nuked our marriage over a text message. My voice remained steady. My hands didn't shake as I flipped through the design portfolio. The only outward sign of my world imploding was a slight tightening around my eyes. I wasn't going to give Daniel the reaction he wanted. Instead, I finished the meeting flawlessly. When my client finally stood, shaking my hand and thanking me for my expertise, I walked him out of the conference room with the same poised professionalism that had built my reputation. Only once I was alone did I allow myself to exhale. Then I typed my response. Good luck. No anger, no pleading, no questions. Just 2 words. Because what Daniel didn't know, what he never suspected, was that I had been ready for this moment. I had seen the signs for months. The sudden gym obsession. The late-night work meetings that never matched his bank statements. The way his phone was always face down, notifications silenced. 3 months ago, I had found a dinner receipt from a Michelin-starred restaurantone I had never been to. The reservation was for 2. That same night, while Daniel was working late, I opened a new bank account at a different institution. 2 weeks later, when he suggested we combine our finances for simplicity, I smiled sweetly and agreed while quietly moving my personal savings into that new account. The joint account he had just emptied, it had exactly enough to keep him from getting suspicious. Everything else, the real money, the business profits he never took seriously, was safely tucked away, along with meticulous documentation of every suspicious financial move he had made over the past year. My phone buzzed again. Don't bother begging. Chloe and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later. Chloe. I knew exactly who she was. The new, enthusiastic personal trainer at his gym. The one he'd been following on social media, liking every photo, especially the ones where she wore barely their workout gear. I'd met her once, in passing. She had smiled too widely, touched his arm just a little too often, giggled at his jokes like he was the most charming man alive. She was young enough to be his daughter, and naive enough to think she was special. I didn't reply to his text. Instead, I called my lawyer. The one I had consulted 2 months ago when I found the hotel charges on our credit card statement. The moment he answered, I said just 3 words. It's time. There was a brief pause, then a knowing response. The papers are ready. Do you want me to have him served in LA? I smiled. No rush. Let him think he's won first. I had spent months preparing for this. Daniel thought he had played me. He had no idea that I was always 3 moves ahead. The signs had been there for months. Looking back, I could see how obvious they were. Daniel had always been a creature of habit. He liked routines. He ordered the same whiskey at dinner, wore the same 2 brands of suits, and stuck to the same small circle of friends he'd known since college. And yet, one day he started changing. At first, it was subtle things. Only someone who had spent over a decade with him would notice. He started going to the gym religiously, claiming he wanted to get back in shape. But Daniel had never been particularly athletic, and suddenly, he was obsessed spending hours working out, eating protein bars, and following fitness influencers on social media. That's how I found out about her. Chloe, the personal trainer whose Instagram stories he watched religiously. A 26-year-old fitness enthusiast who took motivational selfies about grinding for your goals and posted thirst traps in barely their leggings. I wasn't stupid. The first time I saw her name pop up in his recently searched list, I didn't say a word. Instead, I watched and waited. The real wake-up call came 3 months ago. I had been doing laundry, something Daniel never bothered with, when I found a folded-up receipt in the pocket of his suit jacket. A dinner at Les Jardins, one of the most exclusive Michelin-starred restaurants in New York. The date? A night he had told me he was working late. The bill? Over $500. For two. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at that little piece of paper, my fingers tracing over the ink, as if touching it would somehow change what it meant. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I was just done. That was the moment I decided that I wouldn't ask questions. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't cry, scream, or demand answers. Instead, I would prepare. Because while Daniel was busy playing games, I was about to play chess. That same night, while Daniel was still out working late, I made my first move. I opened a new bank account at a separate financial institution. I transferred my personal savings, my business profits, and any liquid assets I could move without raising suspicion. It wasn't easy. Daniel had always assumed that because we were married, our finances should be shared. But I knew better. When he had suggested merging accounts earlier that year, I had cheerfully agreed while strategically keeping all major assets separate. Our joint account had enough money to maintain appearances just enough to cover our usual bills and expenses so he wouldn't suspect a thing. But every dollar that truly mattered? Safe. Untouchable. Mine. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing more and more cracks in his carefully curated lies. The sudden influx of work dinners that never reflected in his paycheck. The late-night phone calls he took in the other room. His growing frustration with money despite the fact that I made significantly more than him. Then came the credit card statements. Hotel charges. Expensive gifts. Withdrawals at odd hours. In unfamiliar places. I documented everything. Screenshots. Bank transfers. Copies of our Prenopone Daniel had signed years ago without reading too closely. Because here's the thing about men like Daniel. They assume they're always in control. They never expect the woman they're cheating on to be smarter than them. A month before he sent that fateful text message, Daniel sat across from me at breakfast, sipping his coffee like nothing had changed. "Babe," he said casually, "we should really merge more of our accounts. It would just make things easier, you know?" I looked up from my phone, smiling. "I think that's a great idea," I said sweetly. He grinned, probably thinking I was falling for it. What he didn't know? That very morning, I had moved the last of my savings out of his reach. That the only thing left in our joint account was just enough to keep up appearances. That in 1 month, when he tried to pull the rug out from under me, he would realize he was standing on air. Because the truth was, I had already pulled the rug out from under him. Daniel thought he had won. He thought he was leaving me shattered, humiliated, and financially ruined. He thought I would cry, beg, chase after him. But the thing about men like Daniel, they never realize when they're the ones walking into a trap. The next morning, while I sipped my coffee and reviewed project blueprints in my office, my phone buzzed again. "Daniel, don't bother begging. Chloe and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later." I almost laughed. Beg? He truly believed I was the kind of woman who would grovel for a man like him. I let the message sit there, unread. Then another one came through. "I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger after all. At least you have your little design firm to keep you busy." Ah, there it was. The condescending jab. The final insult to make sure I knew he pitted me against her. Youth versus experience. Fun versus stability. It was supposed to sting. Instead, I smirked. Because what Daniel didn't know was that my little design firm was worth millions. What he didn't know was that, while he had been planning to leave me broke and abandoned, I had been planning for this exact moment. He thought he had orchestrated the perfect exit. He had no idea that he was simply playing his part in my plan. While Daniel was booking his first-class flight to LA, I was already locking him out of my world. The credit cards he thought he could max out, already canceled. The joint account he had emptied, had just enough left to keep him from getting suspicious, but not a penny more. The penthouse we lived in, solely under my name. The business he assumed he could take half of, legally mine, protected by corporate structuring he never bothered to understand. Daniel had walked out thinking he had stripped me of everything. In reality, he had walked away with nothing but the clothes on his back and a rapidly declining credit score. I took my time finishing my coffee. Then, I made a single phone call. To my lawyer. "It's time," I said simply. He understood immediately. "The papers are ready. Do you want me to have him served in LA?" I thought about it for a moment. I pictured Daniel strutting through LAX, holding Chloe's hand, ready to start his new life only to be handed divorce papers, freezing his assets on the spot. Tempting. But no. No rush, I said, smiling. Let him think he's won first. Let him land. Let him get comfortable. Let him taste the victory he thought was his. Because the moment he realized the truth that I had outmaneuvered him at every turn would be so much sweeter. Daniel had no idea that his so-called triumph was already unraveling. While he and Chloe were likely sipping celebratory cocktails, toasting to their fresh start in Los Angeles, I was calmly dismantling every financial advantage he thought he had. Because what Daniel didn't understand, what men like him never understand, is that money isn't just power, it's control. And he had just handed me all of it. The first call I made was to our bank. Hello, this is Evelyn Carter. I need to report fraudulent transactions on a joint account. I gave them exactly what they needed. Screenshots of Daniel's text confession that he had emptied our account. Copies of his credit card charges for a 5-star hotel and first-class airline tickets to LA. A clear record of him using our shared funds for personal expenses. The bank representative's voice remained professional, but I could hear the undercurrent of satisfaction beneath it. We'll cancel the transactions immediately, Mrs. Carter. Would you like to remove your husband as an authorized user on the account? Yes, please. Click. Just like that, Daniel's luxury escape plan was crumbling. By the time Daniel and Chloe arrived at JFK, ready to board their first-class flight, they had no idea their tickets had already been voided. I imagined the scene unfolding in real time. Daniel confidently handing over their boarding passes, the polite yet firm shake of the airline agent's head, his growing frustration as he argued, demanding answers, only to be told their payment had been declined. The moment of cold realization when he checked his credit card only to see his accounts frozen, his balance near zero. Oh, how I wished I could have been there to witness it. Chloe, fresh-faced and naive, would blink up at him, confusion morphing into panic. Daniel, what's going on? He wouldn't have an answer. Because for the first time in his life, Daniel wasn't in control. While they scrambled at the airport, I made my second call. Royal Westwood Hotel, how may I assist you? Hello, I need to cancel a reservation. Within minutes, their $1,200 a night suite at the Royal Westwood in Beverly Hills was no longer available to them. Their dream vacation? Reduced to a nightmare in the making. Because what happens when a man like Daniel, a man used to comfort, control, privileges, suddenly has nowhere to go? He starts panicking. And panic leads to mistakes. The next morning, the first cracks in Daniel's flawless escape plan began to surface. Mutual friends started texting me. Apparently, word had spread quickly Daniel and Chloe had been spotted at a cheap airport motel, far from the 5-star luxury they had envisioned. One particularly delicious detail? Daniel had tried to use his personal credit cards, but those had already been maxed out for months, something I had noticed weeks ago. He must have assumed that once we divorced, he could access my money. He assumed wrong. Because, legally, my money was never his to take. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I didn't answer. I let him stew in his own mess, probably sitting in that dingy motel room, trying to figure out how the hell everything had gone so wrong. Then came the second call. This time, from his mother. Evelyn, dear. Daniel told us everything. He says you're being vindictive, that you're causing problems with his travel plans. I cut her off. Barbara, did he also tell you that he emptied our joint account? That he used our shared credit cards to fund a trip with his girlfriend? Silence. Then, a hesitant. Well, he said you left him no choice, that you've been cold and distant. Ah, yes, the classic narrative shift. Daniel must have spun a beautiful story, casting himself as the helpless victim and me as the bitter, scorned ex-wife out for revenge. Too bad for him. I had receipts. Would you like me to read you his texts, Barbara? The ones where he brags about taking our money? Or maybe the one where he mocks my age? Another pause, then a quiet. He did seem a bit cruel. I told him that text was inappropriate. Inappropriate? I almost laughed. Men like Daniel always have enablers. But not anymore. Barbara, I said, my voice firm but polite. I appreciate your call, but I think it's best if we end this conversation. My lawyer has advised minimal contact during the proceedings. Proceedings. I let the word sink in. Her voice wavered. Proceedings? You mean... Yes, Barbara. Divorce. Effective immediately. Click. I hung up. And just like that, Daniel's lifeline was gone. By the end of the day, the gossip mill was in full swing. Daniel's sister, Amanda, had started calling mutual friends, trying to piece together what had actually happened. His former colleagues were laughing about how he had boasted about his big plans for LA, only to be stuck at a budget motel. And Chloe? Well, Chloe had started posting cryptic Instagram stories about disappointments and toxic energy. The cracks were forming. I smiled, pouring myself a glass of the good wine, the bottle I had been saving for a special occasion. Because this was worth celebrating. Tomorrow, Daniel would wake up to a legal battle he never saw coming. But tonight, I would simply enjoy watching him lose. Daniel had spent his entire life assuming that rules didn't apply to him. That charm and arrogance were enough to get him out of trouble. That he could lie, cheat, and manipulate his way through any situation and still come out on top. But today, reality was about to slap him across the face. When I arrived at the courthouse, I was greeted by my lawyer, James, a seasoned divorce attorney with a reputation for dismantling men like Daniel. "He looks bad," James murmured as we walked toward the courtroom. I didn't have to ask what he meant. I had already heard the gossip. Daniel had been scrambling for a new lawyer, realizing far too late that the cheap divorce attorney he hired online wasn't going to cut it. And as I stepped inside, I saw him. He was sitting at the defendant's table, wearing a blazer that was slightly too tight, a desperate attempt to cling to the image of the powerful executive he once was. His hair was unkempt, his jaw was tense. And beside him, no Chloe. She had disappeared from his life weeks ago, once she realized that being with a broke, disgraced, middle-aged man wasn't quite the glamorous fantasy she had imagined. I took my seat, smoothing the fabric of my tailored dress. This was my battlefield, and I had already won. Daniel's lawyer, a nervous-looking man in an ill-fitted suit, stood first. "Your Honor," he began, already on the defensive, "while my client acknowledges certain financial decisions that may have been impulsive, we believe that Mrs. Carter's actions have been unnecessarily punitive. This divorce should be settled fairly." Fairly? I almost laughed. My lawyer, James, stood calmly and laid out our case with ruthless efficiency. Exhibit A. Screenshots of Daniel's own texts, bragging about draining our joint account. Exhibit B. Bank records showing suspicious withdrawals and fraudulent charges. Exhibit C. Evidence that he had hidden expenses for months, proving his intent to manipulate finances. Then, James delivered the final blow. "Your Honor, my client's business, Carter Interiors, was founded before this marriage, funded exclusively by her own income, and has remained financially independent throughout. Miss Carter has no legal claim to it. We have the incorporation documents, profit records, and clear evidence that he mocked this very business as a little hobby." The judge turned to Daniel, raising an unimpressed eyebrow. "Mr. Carter, do you deny these text messages where you refer to your wife's business as insignificant?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I was just joking." The judge cut him off. "A joke? So you claim no stake in a business you dismissed as trivial?" I watched as Daniel realized he had walked straight into a trap. He had mocked my career. He had underestimated me. And now that arrogance was costing him everything. After hours of failed arguments from his lawyer, the judge finally spoke. "The court finds sufficient evidence of financial misconduct on Mr. Carter's part. As such, all shared assets are hereby frozen pending final dissolution. Furthermore, Mr. Carter is ordered to return the withdrawn funds within 24 hours. I glanced at Daniel, watching as his face turned pale. "But that money's gone!" he burst out, panic creeping into his voice. "We spent it on." The judge held up a hand. "Then I suggest you find a way to replace it, Mr. Carter." Silence. A heavy, crushing silence as Daniel realized the weight of what he had done. And just like that, the fantasy he had built off running away, of living a lavish life with Chloe, of screwing me over and walking away unscathed, came crashing down around him. As I stepped outside, I caught a glimpse of Daniel standing near the steps. His former confidence was gone. His arrogance had crumbled. And for the first time in his life, he looked small. I could hear him arguing on the phone with his mother, trying to convince her to let him move back home. "It's just temporary, Mom. I just need a place to figure things out." Her voice, though muffled, was unmistakably tired. I didn't stop. I didn't say a word. I simply walked past him, my heels clicking against the pavement, heading back to the successful business he never understood or respected. Because while Daniel had spent his time chasing after illusions, I had spent mine building something real. And now, he was nothing more than a footnote in my success story. Daniel always thought of himself as untouchable. He believed that no matter what he did, no matter who he hurt, would always land on his feet. That someone would always be there to bail him out. That his charm, arrogance, and manipulation would carry him through life, just like they always had. But the thing about men like Daniel, they never see the fall coming, until it's too late. It started almost immediately after the court ruling. Daniel walked out of the courthouse that day with no access to my money, no claim to my business, no legal loophole to save him. His plan had collapsed in real time, and for the first time he was forced to face the consequences of his own arrogance. The hotel he had planned to stay at in Los Angeles? Cancelled. The credit cards he assumed he could rely on? Maxed out. The high-paying job he used to brag about? In jeopardy? Because while Daniel had been plotting his escape, his company had been making changes of its own. At first, Daniel assumed he was safe. Sure, he was financially unstable, but he still had his job, right? Wrong. Because while I had been watching him, his company had been watching him too. HR had received complaints about his special treatment of Chloe, his affair partner, when she was still working as a receptionist. Upper management had caught wind of his reckless spending habits and the financial misconduct in our marriage. The executives had already been considering layoffs. And Daniel? Daniel had just given them the perfect excuse to cut him loose. 1 week after our final court hearing, Daniel walked into his office and walked right back out with a severance package in his hands. It wasn't a promotion. It wasn't a better offer. It was a forced exit. And just like that, his last safety net was gone. Chloe, of course, had been watching everything unfold. She had already been questioning her choices. The glamorous escape she had envisioned with Daniel had quickly turned into a stressful, unstable mess. She had gone from fancy restaurants to cheap takeout in a tiny apartment. From luxury hotels to splitting rent with a man twice her age. From being his exciting new adventure to his financial lifeline. And Chloe? Chloe wasn't built for that life. She had invested in the fantasy of Daniel, not the reality of him. And when that reality started weighing her down, when she realized she was carrying him instead of being carried, she did what Daniel never expected. She left. It wasn't long before word got around. Daniel had built his entire persona around being successful, being admired, being the guy that other men envied. But now he was the butt of the joke. His former colleagues gossiped about how he had lost everything in the divorce. His family, who once defended him, started whispering about how he had ruined his own life. Even his friends, the ones who used to praise him, started distancing themselves because who wanted to be associated with a man who had nothing left? Daniel had built his identity on power and status. But without money, without a career, without a younger woman clinging to his arm, he was just another washed-up man who had overplayed his hand. His last attempt at saving face came a few months later. A mutual friend, Amanda, dropped by my office unexpectedly. "You're not going to believe this," she said, shaking her head as she set her purse down. "Try me," I replied, leaning back in my chair. She smirked. Daniel tried to come back to his old company and claim age discrimination. I blinked. Wait, what? Yep. After they let him go, he filed a complaint saying they fired him because he was too old. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Daniel who had abandoned me for a younger woman. Daniel who had mocked me for being not getting any younger. Now, Daniel was trying to weaponize ageism to get his job back? "Please tell me they didn't take him seriously," I said, still amused. Amanda grinned. I added his complaint to his existing file, then politely told him to get lost. I smirked. Poetic justice. Amanda leaned in. "Oh, it gets better. He moved back in with his parents." That caught me off guard. "You're kidding." "Nope. His mom is mortified, of course. She told me on the phone the other day that she raised him better and doesn't understand how he let his life fall apart so fast." I exhaled, shaking my head. "She enabled him for years. She's just seeing the result of that now." Amanda nodded, sipping her coffee. "It's funny," she mused. "All this time he thought you were the one holding him back. But without you, he's got nothing." I looked out the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. "He did this to himself," I said simply. And I meant it. The truth was, I didn't hate Daniel. I didn't even pity him. I had simply moved on. I had spent years being his safety net, his support system, his fallback plan. But the moment I walked away, he collapsed under the weight of his own bad decisions. Because that's the difference between us. I built something real. He built illusions. I planned for the future. He ran from it. I protected myself. He assumed he'd always be protected. And now I was thriving. And Daniel? Daniel was back in his childhood bedroom at 48 years old, unemployed, broke, and utterly alone. The man who once thought he had outsmarted me had played himself. And that was the best revenge of all. It had been 6 months since the divorce was finalized. 6 months since Daniel had lost everything: his money, his reputation, his job, and whatever illusion of power he thought he had over me. 6 months since I had walked away from the wreckage unscathed, my business thriving, my life peaceful. I barely thought about him anymore. Until she walked through my office door. I had just finished reviewing a design proposal when my assistant Mia knocked softly. "There's someone here to see you," she said hesitantly. I looked up, expecting a client, but it wasn't a client. It was her, Chloe. She stood just inside the doorway, clutching the strap of her expensive handbag on, that still had the faintest hint of luxury, but had clearly seen better days. I tilted my head, momentarily surprised, before leaning back in my chair. "Chloe," I said evenly, watching her shift awkwardly under my gaze. "Evelyn," she replied, her voice softer than I remembered. The last time I had seen Chloe, she had been an afterthought in my life. A name on a text message. A silhouette in the background of Daniel's pathetic midlife crisis. Back then, she had been the woman he left me for. Now, she just looked lost. Her once effortless confidence had dimmed. Her Instagram perfect glow seemed faded. And despite myself, I was intrigued. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" She swallowed, nodding. "I believed everything he told me," she admitted. "That you were cold, controlling, that you didn't support his dreams." I almost laughed. Daniel didn't have dreams. He had escapes. And Chloe had been one of them. "I thought I was different," she continued, giving a weak laugh, as if mocking herself. "I thought I was special." She shook her head. "But then I watched him try the same manipulation on me, the same gaslighting, the same excuses." She looked up, meeting my gaze. "You were right." I let the words sit in the air for a moment before responding. "What was it?" I asked. "The moment you realized?" Chloe exhaled, almost as if she had been waiting for this conversation. "It was when the money ran out," she admitted. Honest. Blunt. And for the first time, I respected her for it. At first it was fun. The hotels, the restaurants, the shopping. He made it seem like he had it all figured out. But then, the credit card stopped working. The hotel kicked us out. And suddenly, I was sharing my tiny apartment with a 47-year-old man who couldn't even pay his half of the rent. I could almost see the moment it hit her. The disillusionment. The realization that she had traded a fantasy for a man who had nothing to offer but broken promises and arrogance. "He started complaining," she said, shaking her head. "About everything. About how I wasn't supporting his dreams. About how I was selfish for not understanding his situation." I smirked. "Let me guess. He had big plans, but no way to fund them?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Exactly. Everything was going to work out once his investments paid off. Once he got that promotion. Once his cryptocurrency definitely increased in value." She rubbed her forehead, as if reliving the exhaustion. I got tired of the excuses, the entitlement, the way he acted like the world owed him something. She looked at me, her expression softer now. "I left him 2 months ago, and I realized I wasn't the first woman he used like that. I was just the most recent." For the first time since she walked in, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not pity, not sympathy, but understanding. Because once upon a time, I had believed in Daniel too. I had excused the same behavior, made the same justifications, ignored the same red flags. The only difference? I had learned my lesson before it destroyed me. Chloe had to crash and burn first. "So what now?" I asked. She straightened her shoulders. "I started my own business," she said. "Social media consulting. I'm taking clients, helping them build their brands. I don't make much yet, but it's mine." That was unexpected. And, oddly, I respected it. She reached into her bag, pulling out a business card and placing it on my desk. "If you ever need digital marketing for your firm, let me know." I stared at the card for a moment before meeting her gaze. "You'll do better this time," I said simply. She nodded, then gave a small smile before turning to leave. But before she stepped out, she paused. "Daniel tried to move in with me," she said over her shoulder. "Thought my studio apartment would be temporary. After 2 weeks of him complaining about the size of my closet and suggesting I take out a loan for a bigger place, I finally understood what you meant about the difference between dreams and escapes." I let out a quiet laugh. "Took you long enough." She laughed too. "Yeah, but at least I learned." And with that, she was gone. I sat there for a moment, looking down at her business card. I wasn't sure if I'd ever use it. But one thing was certain. Chloe was no longer the girl who replaced me. She was just another woman who had learned the same lesson I had. It had been 1 year since Daniel walked out of my life. 1 year since he sent that pathetic, arrogant text, convinced he was leaving me in ruins. 1 year since he emptied our joint account, packed his bags, and ran off to Los Angeles, thinking he had outsmarted me. 1 year since I let him believe he had won right before I ripped the ground out from under him. Now, standing in my newly expanded office, overseeing the latest renovations to my second flagship location, I realized something. I barely thought about him anymore. But today, I had one last loose end to tie up. That morning, my phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer, James. Mark filed another petition to revisit the settlement. Judge dismissed it immediately. Thought you'd enjoy that. I smirked. Of course he did. Daniel had spent the last year trying to undo his own mistakes, filing weak, last-ditch legal attempts to challenge the divorce ruling. Each time, the judge had shut him down without hesitation. Because here's the thing about men like Daniel. They're not strategists. They're not planners. They don't think ahead. They act out of arrogance, then panic when their impulsive decisions blow up in their faces. And now, Daniel was drowning. Through mutual acquaintances, I knew exactly what had happened to him. His job, gone. His employer had laid him off during a company restructuring. The promotion he had once bragged about, given to someone else. His finances? In shambles. With his reckless spending and mountain of debt, he had no savings left. His dating life? A joke. The younger women he once chased avoided him now. Word had spread about his history of manipulation and financial recklessness. His home? His childhood bedroom. That's right, at 48 years old, Daniel had moved back in with his parents. The man who had mocked me about my age, who had ridiculed me for my success, who had thought he could replace me so easily, was now living with his mother, eating home-cooked meals, and sleeping under a floral bedspread from his teenage years. And me? I was thriving. I hadn't seen Daniel in months, not since our last court hearing, where I watched him desperately argue for a share of my company, only for the judge to laugh him out of the room. But today, as I was leaving my office, I saw him. He was standing outside, shifting awkwardly near the entrance of my building. He looked different, older, thinner. The cocky arrogance he once carried like a shield was nowhere to be found. He looked up as I approached, eyes flicking toward the sleek black car waiting for me at the curb. For a brief moment, I saw a flash of recognition in his face. I had moved on. I had won. And he knew it. Evelyn, he started, his voice hesitant. I tilted my head, waiting. You destroyed me. I let out a short laugh. No, Daniel, you destroyed yourself. He flinched but quickly masked it with frustration. You didn't have to be so vindictive, he muttered. You had everything. Did you really have to take everything from me? I crossed my arms. Take, Daniel? I didn't take anything from you. I just made sure you couldn't take from me. He stared at me, as if struggling to find the right words. I don't understand, he finally said. You planned all of this. You knew this would happen. I smiled. No, Daniel, I just paid attention. His jaw clenched. I was going to be someone, you know, he muttered. No, you were always just trying to pretend to be someone, I corrected. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. You'll never change, Evelyn. And you'll never grow up, Daniel. Silence. For the first time, I saw something flicker across his face that almost looked like regret, but it was too late for that. Way too late. I stepped past him, pausing just briefly before getting into my car. By the way, I said, turning slightly, you once told me to have fun with my little design firm. He looked confused, like he barely remembered saying it. So? I smiled. It just opened its third location. I didn't wait for his reaction. I simply got into my car, shut the door, and let the driver pull away. Later that evening, as I sat in my office, my eyes flicked to the framed screenshot hanging on the wall. Daniel's infamous text message, frozen in time. Have fun with your little design firm. At least it'll keep you busy. Below it, my latest business award, framed just beneath the text. The irony wasn't lost on me. Daniel had intended to break me. Instead, he had given me the ultimate motivation. I had built something stronger, something lasting, something that proved that revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better. And as I sipped my wine, watching as orders poured in from my online store, I smiled. Because while Daniel was stuck reliving his past, I was building my future. And that was the best revenge of all. Life isn't always fair. And sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who betray us the deepest. But pain does not define you, how you respond to it does. Evelyn's story is more than just a tale of smart revenge. It's a testament to the power of preparation, financial independence, and self-respect. When blind love makes us vulnerable, awareness and resilience become our shield. Never let anyone have complete control over your future. Protect your assets, build your career, and always have a backup plan. When someone tries to tear you down, Don't waste your energy on anger, let your success be your response. Most importantly, never underestimate yourself. People like Daniel thrive on manipulation, but they always lose against those who are smart, patient, and fully aware of their worth. In any situation, remember, preparation is not paranoia, it is power.